The sun was shining brightly over Buckingham Palace, casting a golden glow on its towering gates and the perfectly manicured gardens surrounding it. Tourists from all corners of the globe milled about, snapping photos, pointing excitedly at the iconic building, and marveling at the sight of the royal guards standing tall in their striking red tunics and bearskin hats. Among them was Victoria Langston, a woman who could easily be spotted in any crowd, not just because of her designer clothes or oversized sunglasses, but because she carried herself as if the world revolved around her. Victoria had flown into London 2 days ago, treating the trip like her personal runway show. Every step she took seemed choreographed for an invisible audience. Her social media accounts were already flooded with glamorous pictures, sipping tea at Harrods, posing beside Big Ben, and shopping along Oxford Street. To her, this vacation wasn't just about seeing new places. It was about proving that she belonged among the elite, even if only for a week. But there was something else beneath her polished exterior, a simmering sense of entitlement that made her believe rules didn't apply to someone like her. As she approached the palace gates, her eyes landed on the stoic figures of the royal guards. They stood motionless, their faces expressionless, exuding discipline and tradition. Most tourists admired their dedication, whispering quietly so as not to disturb the solemn atmosphere. But Victoria saw things differently. She nudged her assistant, smirking. "Look at them," she said loudly, her voice dripping with condescension. "They're just standing there doing nothing. What's the big deal?" Her assistant nodded nervously, knowing better than to argue. Victoria walked closer to one of the guards, holding up her phone for a selfie. "Hey, smile," she called out, waving her hand to get his attention. But the guard remained still, his gaze fixed straight ahead, unbothered by her antics. This irritated Victoria. Who did he think he was, ignoring her? Didn't he know who she was? She tried again, louder this time, even striking a pose. Still, nothing. The guard didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't acknowledge her existence. Frustration bubbled inside her. How dare he act so? Superior? In her mind, his silence wasn't professionalism, it was arrogance. And when Victoria felt slighted, she never backed down. Nearby, a street artist sat cross-legged on the pavement, painting vibrant portraits of the guards. His work attracted a small group of curious onlookers, admiring how he captured every detail of their uniforms. Victoria glanced at the paints scattered around him and smirked. An idea began forming in her head. An idea fueled by anger, privilege, and a complete disregard for boundaries. The stage was set. Unbeknownst to anyone, what happened next would change lives forever. Victoria's irritation grew with each passing second. The guard's unwavering stance felt like a personal insult, and her frustration quickly turned into something uglier, resentment. She muttered under her breath, her words sharp and laced with disdain. "These people think they're better than everyone else," she sneered, loud enough for those closest to hear. Her assistant shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing, knowing better than to intervene when Victoria was in this kind of mood. Her gaze drifted back to the street artist nearby, who was now adding delicate brushstrokes to his latest portrait. The vibrant colors of his paints caught her eye, particularly a bright red sitting just within arm's reach. Without hesitation, Victoria strode over, grabbed the can, and marched back toward the guard. A few onlookers noticed her sudden movement and exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of what she was about to do. "This'll teach him to ignore me," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Before anyone could react, she tilted the can and poured its contents directly onto the guard's immaculate uniform. The thick red paint dripped down his chest, staining the fabric and pooling at his polished boots. Gasps rippled through the crowd as people realized what had just happened. Some stepped back in disbelief, while others whipped out their phones to capture the shocking scene unfolding before them. The guard remained motionless, his training keeping him rooted in place despite the blatant disrespect. His face betrayed no emotion, though his jaw tightened ever so slightly, a tiny flicker of humanity breaking through his disciplined exterior. Victoria, however, seemed pleased with herself. She tossed the empty can onto the ground and crossed her arms, smirking as if she'd won some sort of victory. "That's what you get for being rude," she declared loudly, her tone dripping with self-righteousness. The crowd didn't respond the way she expected. Instead of applause or laughter, there was a collective murmur of disapproval. Someone shouted, "That's disgusting." Another voice chimed in, "You can't just do that." The street artist looked horrified, staring at his ruined supplies and then at the defaced guard. Even Victoria's assistant took a cautious step away, clearly uneasy about being associated with her actions. Within moments, the situation escalated further. Security personnel stationed nearby rushed over, demanding to know what had happened. Bystanders eagerly recounted the incident, pointing fingers at Victoria and showing videos they'd already recorded. One woman held up her phone, saying, "She used racial slurs too. You need to hear this." The accusation hung heavy in the air, drawing even more attention from passersby. As the gravity of her actions began to sink in, Victoria's confidence wavered. For the first time, she glanced around and saw the sea of angry faces surrounding her. Cameras flashed, capturing every detail of her now infamous smirk. What started as a petty act of defiance had spiraled into something far bigger and far worse than she could have imagined. Little did she know, this single moment would soon consume her entire life, turning her into a global pariah overnight. Within hours, the video of Victoria's shocking behavior spread like wildfire across social media. The clip, showing her pouring paint on the guard and making racially charged comments, became the centerpiece of outrage worldwide. People couldn't stop talking about it. On Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and every other platform imaginable. Hashtags like #RespectTheGuard, #PrivilegeExposed, and #KarenAtBuckingham trended globally, with millions weighing in on the incident. Some expressed disbelief that someone could be so brazen, while others were furious at the blatant disrespect shown to a symbol of British tradition. Back in London, authorities wasted no time taking action. The Royal Guards were not just ceremonial figures. They represented centuries of discipline, honor, and service. What Victoria had done wasn't merely vandalism. It was an attack on something deeply cherished by the British people. Within 24 hours, she was formally charged with multiple offenses, including criminal damage, public disorder, and verbal harassment. News outlets picked up the story, broadcasting images of her smirking face alongside headlines like "Tourist Humiliates Guard" and "Entitled American Faces Justice." The backlash grew louder as details of her privileged lifestyle came to light. Photos of her luxury penthouse, designer wardrobe, and private jet surfaced online, fueling accusations that her wealth had given her a sense of invincibility. Critics argued that her actions were emblematic of a larger issue, a culture of entitlement where some believe rules didn't apply to them. Commentators dissected her behavior, pointing out how her lack of remorse and apparent disdain for cultural norms made her the perfect villain in this real-life drama. Meanwhile, brands and companies associated with Victoria scrambled to distance themselves from her. Luxury fashion labels that once featured her in their campaigns issued statements condemning her actions. A high-end jewelry brand even went so far as to remove all traces of her from their website, replacing her photos with new ambassadors who better aligned with their values. Her book deal, which she'd proudly announced just weeks earlier, was abruptly canceled. Publishers cited ethical concerns as the reason, leaving Victoria without one of the projects she'd been counting on to boost her profile. Even her inner circle began to crumble. Friends who once flocked to her lavish parties stopped returning her calls. Associates deleted old posts featuring her, scrubbing their social media accounts clean of any connection to her. One of her closest confidants reportedly told a gossip columnist, "I don't want to be anywhere near this mess." For someone who thrived on attention and validation, being abandoned by those she considered allies was devastating. But perhaps the most significant blow came when the British government announced that Victoria would be banned from entering the UK indefinitely. This decision sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles, underscoring the severity of her actions. It also meant she wouldn't be able to return to defend herself in court, forcing her to hire lawyers remotely and rely on representatives to handle proceedings on her behalf. As the days passed, Victoria retreated from public view, hiding behind closed doors and avoiding reporters camped outside her hotel. Rumors swirled about her mental state, with some speculating she was overwhelmed by guilt, while others claimed she remained unapologetic. Regardless, one thing was clear: the life she had built, full of glamour, privilege, and adoration, was crumbling faster than anyone could have predicted, and there was no sign of it stopping anytime soon. As the storm surrounding her grew fiercer, Victoria refused to take full responsibility for her actions. Instead, she dug in her heels, determined to salvage what remained of her crumbling reputation. With the help of a high-profile lawyer known for defending controversial clients, she crafted a carefully worded statement designed to shift the narrative in her favor. The message was simple. She claimed the incident had been misunderstood, blown out of proportion by an overly critical public. "I never intended to offend anyone," she said in the written apology posted on her social media accounts. What happened was a harmless joke that spiraled out of control due to misinformation and exaggerated accounts. She went on to accuse the guard of provoking her, suggesting he had deliberately ignored her because of her nationality. "I felt disrespected and reacted emotionally," she wrote, attempting to paint herself as the victim. To bolster her case, she pointed fingers at the bystanders who filmed the incident, accusing them of editing videos to make her look worse than she was. But the internet wasn't buying it. Within minutes of posting her statement, replies flooded in, tearing apart her version of events. Critics highlighted the leaked footage, showing her using racially insensitive language before pouring the paint, evidence that directly contradicted her claims of innocence. Memes mocking her excuses began circulating online, with captions like "harmless joke" superimposed over images of the defaced guard. Even late-night talk show hosts joined in, dedicating entire segments to dissecting her defense. One comedian quipped, "If ignoring someone is now considered provocation, I guess we're all guilty." Her attempts to deflect blame only made things worse. Supporters of the Royal Guard rallied behind him, praising his composure during the ordeal. A petition calling for stricter penalties against tourists who disrespect cultural symbols gained tens of thousands of signatures overnight. Meanwhile, the street artist whose paint she'd stolen spoke out publicly, condemning her behavior. "That paint wasn't just material. It represented my art and hard work," he said in an interview. "She didn't just ruin the guard's uniform. She disrespected everyone watching." The pressure mounted as more revelations surfaced. Journalists uncovered old interviews where Victoria boasted about bending rules to suit her needs, reinforcing perceptions of her as someone who believed herself above accountability. Former employees came forward with stories of her demanding nature, describing how she expected special treatment wherever she went. Each new detail chipped away at whatever credibility she still had left. Despite the mounting evidence against her, Victoria clung to her denial. In private conversations with close acquaintances, she insisted she'd done nothing wrong and blamed the media for turning her into a scapegoat. "This isn't fair," she reportedly told a friend. "People are making me out to be some kind of monster when all I did was have a bad moment." But even those closest to her struggled to defend her anymore. As one acquaintance put it, "There's owning up to your mistakes, and then there's doubling down when you're clearly in the wrong." She chose the latter. With each passing day, Victoria found herself more isolated, not just from the world, but also from herself. Her refusal to acknowledge the gravity of her actions kept her trapped in a cycle of denial, unable to move forward or begin repairing the damage she'd caused. And while the court case loomed ahead, it became increasingly clear that no amount of legal maneuvering would undo the harm she'd inflicted. Not on the guard, not on her own life, and certainly not on the trust she'd shattered along the way. The legal proceedings against Victoria began to unfold, and with them came a cascade of consequences that left her reeling. Each day seemed to bring another blow, chipping away at the life she had once taken for granted. The charges against her were serious: criminal damage, public disorder, and verbal harassment, and the British legal system showed no leniency. Without the ability to enter the UK to defend herself in person, Victoria relied on her high-profile lawyer and local representatives to handle the case, but even they couldn't shield her from the avalanche of penalties heading her way. First came the financial hits. Luxury brands that had once paid her hefty sums to endorse their products severed ties completely. A watch company that featured her in a multi-million-dollar campaign issued a terse statement, saying, "We do not condone behavior that disrespects cultural values or individuals." Her designer wardrobe, once a source of pride, was now a reminder of everything she'd lost. She tried selling pieces online to cover mounting legal fees, but buyers balked at purchasing items associated with such controversy. Even auction houses refused to list her belongings, citing reputational risks. Her social circle evaporated just as quickly. Friends who had laughed at her jokes and attended her exclusive parties vanished without explanation. Some blocked her number. Others simply stopped responding to messages. At first, Victoria convinced herself it was temporary. They'd come around once the dust settled. But deep down, she knew better. The same people who once praised her were now ashamed to be linked to her name. One former acquaintance told a reporter anonymously, "It's like she became toxic overnight. No one wants to catch whatever she has." As if these losses weren't enough, the court handed down its verdict. Victoria was found guilty on all counts. Fines piled up, forcing her to sell off assets she'd assumed would last a lifetime. Her penthouse apartment, filled with expensive furniture and artwork, went on the market at a fraction of its original value. Potential buyers toured the space, whispering about how it belonged to that woman before shaking their heads and walking away. In the end, she had to settle for far less than she'd hoped, leaving her finances in shambles. Stripped of her wealth, status, and support system, Victoria retreated into isolation. Gone were the days of red carpets and champagne-filled nights. Instead, she spent hours alone in a modest rental apartment, scrolling through news articles and social media posts about herself. Every mention stung, a constant reminder of how far she'd fallen. Public opinion remained firmly against her, with many refusing to forgive her actions. Comment sections under updates about her case brimmed with vitriol, calling her out for her privilege and lack of remorse. Yet, amid the chaos, there were moments when Victoria allowed herself to reflect. Late at night, sitting by the window of her small apartment, she wondered how things had spiraled so out of control. Had she really been so blind to the impact of her actions? Was it possible to rebuild her life after such devastation? These questions lingered unanswered, haunting her like shadows in the dark. For now, all she could do was endure the fallout, hoping someday the world might forget her name, or at least stop associating it with shame. Desperate to claw her way out of the abyss she'd created, Victoria agreed to participate in a televised apology, an attempt to win back some semblance of public forgiveness. The event was heavily publicized, with news outlets speculating whether this would mark the beginning of her redemption or simply another PR disaster. Dressed in a plain gray sweater and minimal makeup, Victoria appeared visibly different from the polished figure the world had grown accustomed to seeing. Her usual air of confidence was replaced by nervous fidgeting as she sat stiffly on the talk show couch, clutching a piece of paper filled with handwritten notes. "I want to start by saying I am deeply sorry," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "What happened that day was wrong, and I take full responsibility for my actions." She went on to acknowledge the harm she caused, not only to the royal guard, but also to the broader community who viewed his role as a symbol of pride and tradition. "I let my emotions get the better of me, and in doing so, I disrespected something sacred," she continued, her eyes welling up with tears. "I never meant to hurt anyone, but I understand now that my behavior was unacceptable." For a moment, it seemed like the audience might soften toward her. Social media lit up with comments praising her vulnerability and willingness to apologize publicly. Some viewers even expressed hope that she could turn over a new leaf. But then came the backlash. Critics quickly pointed out that her apology lacked depth. It skimmed over the racial undertones of her remarks and failed to address why she had acted so entitled in the first place. One commentator wrote, "An apology isn't just about saying, 'I'm sorry.' It's about showing you truly understand what you did wrong. This feels more like damage control than genuine remorse." Others dissected her body language and tone, accusing her of insincerity. She looked like she was reading lines from a script, one viewer remarked. Another added, if she really understood the weight of her actions, she wouldn't have waited until her life fell apart to say anything. Even the host of the show pressed her during the interview, asking pointed questions about accountability and whether she planned to educate herself on cultural sensitivity moving forward. Victoria stumbled through her responses, clearly unprepared for such scrutiny. Despite the mixed reception, Victoria clung to the idea that this apology marked the start of her comeback. She hired a publicist to help craft a new image, one focused on humility and self-improvement. Behind closed doors, however, doubts lingered. Friends and acquaintances whispered that she still didn't grasp the magnitude of her misdeeds. "She thinks this is all about bad press," one insider revealed. But it's bigger than that. It's about respect, empathy, and understanding your place in the world. In the weeks following the televised apology, Victoria tried to rebuild her life quietly. She enrolled in online courses about diversity and cultural awareness, posting photos of her coursework on social media in an effort to prove she was serious about change. Yet these gestures often felt performative, lacking authenticity. While some applauded her efforts, many remained skeptical, viewing her attempts at redemption as too little too late. Though Victoria hoped this chapter would close with her apology, the court of public opinion wasn't ready to forgive her. For every person willing to give her a second chance, there were dozens more who believed she hadn't earned it yet. And so her journey toward redemption, if it could even be called that, remained incomplete, leaving her stuck between regret and resistance, unsure of how to truly make amends. Months turned into years, and Victoria Langston faded from the public eye, becoming a name whispered only in passing or brought up as a cautionary tale. The woman who once thrived on attention now lived quietly, far removed from the glitz and glamour she once craved. Her Instagram account, once a carefully curated gallery of luxury vacations and designer outfits, lay dormant, its last post being her televised apology, a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes can change. She rented a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood, spending most of her days reading books she'd never bothered to open before and taking long walks to clear her mind. Meanwhile, the royal guard involved in the incident returned to his duties after a brief leave, emerging as an unexpected hero to many. Supporters sent letters of admiration to Buckingham Palace, praising his composure during such a disrespectful act. Some even created fan art depicting him standing tall against adversity, turning him into a symbol of dignity and resilience. Locals would nod respectfully whenever they spotted him patrolling near the palace gates, grateful for his unwavering dedication to tradition. Victoria occasionally reflected on the aftermath of her actions, though she struggled to fully grasp why her behavior had sparked such widespread condemnation. She read articles dissecting privilege and entitlement, trying to understand perspectives she'd never considered before. Sometimes she found herself thinking about the guard, not out of guilt, but curiosity. What must it have been like for him to stand there motionless while someone poured paint over his uniform? Did he feel anger, humiliation, or was it just another test of discipline? Despite her efforts to rebuild her life, remnants of her past lingered. Strangers occasionally recognized her at coffee shops or grocery stores, their stares cold and judgmental. Once, a teenager approached her holding a phone with a viral video of the incident playing on loop. "Is this really you?" the young girl asked bluntly. Victoria nodded silently, feeling the familiar weight of shame settle over her. It was moments like these that reminded her forgiveness wasn't something she could demand. It had to be earned. Years later, Victoria decided to write a memoir titled Paint and Privilege, framing her downfall as a lesson learned the hard way. In its pages, she recounted the events leading up to the incident, her failed attempts at redemption, and the painful process of rebuilding her identity. While some critics praised her honesty, others dismissed the book as yet another attempt to exploit her notoriety for profit. Reviews were mixed. One reader wrote, "Her story is compelling, but I'm not convinced she truly understands the harm she caused." Another added, "It feels like she's still making excuses." For the guard, life moved forward uneventfully, untouched by the chaos Victoria had unleashed. He continued his service with quiet pride, content to let his work speak for itself. Occasionally, when tourists asked if he was the guard from the paint incident, he'd simply smile politely and redirect their focus to the history of the palace. To him, the ordeal was just another chapter in a long career dedicated to duty and honor. As time passed, Victoria's story became less about her and more about the lessons society drew from her mistakes. Discussions about privilege, accountability, and cultural respect gained momentum, inspiring workshops and campaigns aimed at fostering greater empathy. For better or worse, her actions served as a mirror reflecting societal flaws and a warning of how quickly unchecked entitlement can lead to ruin. Years after the incident, Victoria Langston's memoir, Paint and Privilege, hit bookstore shelves, sparking renewed interest in a story many had tried to forget. The book became a topic of debate, dividing readers into two camps: those who saw it as a sincere attempt at self-reflection, and others who viewed it as yet another desperate bid for relevance. On talk shows and podcasts, experts dissected her narrative, questioning whether she had truly grown or was simply rebranding herself for profit. "It's easy to say you've changed," one commentator noted, "but real growth happens when no one is watching." For Victoria, writing the memoir was both cathartic and painful. She revisited moments she'd rather forget. The smug smirk captured on camera, the racial slurs caught on tape, the avalanche of backlash that followed. Yet, even as she claimed to have learned from her mistakes, critics pointed out glaring gaps in her understanding. Her reflections often skirted around accountability, focusing instead on how the scandal had affected her. She still sees herself as the victim. One reviewer wrote, "Until she stops centering herself in this story, she'll never fully grasp its impact." Despite the mixed reception, the book reignited conversations about privilege and power dynamics. Schools began using excerpts in classrooms to teach students about cultural sensitivity and the consequences of unchecked entitlement. Activists cited her downfall as an example of why humility and respect matter, while psychologists analyzed how someone so privileged could fail to recognize boundaries. In some ways, Victoria's missteps became a catalyst for broader discussions, though few credited her directly for it. Meanwhile, the royal guard continued his quiet life, avoiding the spotlight entirely. When approached by journalists hoping to interview him about the incident, he politely declined, choosing instead to focus on his work and family. To him, the past was just that, the past. He harbored no ill will toward Victoria, believing her punishment had already been severe enough. His colleagues admired his grace, often joking that he handled the situation better than anyone else could have. As for Victoria, she eventually found solace in anonymity. Living a simpler life forced her to confront parts of herself she'd long ignored. She volunteered at local charities, tutored underprivileged children, and even started painting, a hobby inspired by the street artist whose supplies she'd once stolen. Though these efforts were small, they gave her a sense of purpose she'd never experienced before. For the first time in years, she felt like she was contributing something meaningful, even if it went unnoticed by the world. In the end, Victoria's story served as a cautionary tale, not just about privilege, but about the fragility of reputation and the importance of empathy. It reminded people that actions have consequences, especially when fueled by arrogance and ignorance. And while forgiveness remained elusive for Victoria, her journey underscored a universal truth. Redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning from it and striving to do better, even when the world refuses to forget. The guard, on the other hand, stood as a testament to resilience and dignity. Where Victoria faltered, he excelled, embodying the values she had so blatantly disregarded. Together, their stories painted a complex picture of human nature, one marked by flaws, forgiveness, and the enduring hope for change.